NCS is special to me. My kids and my family grew up in New Jersey, went to the NCS chapter in New Jersey for a bunch of years, started coming to New York, got to do Thursday New York office days and come to the chapter here and down in Florida. And there's 120 guys in Florida that meet on Wednesday morning. So it's the portability doesn't just go from the Republican Women's Center to the Union League Club. It goes like wherever you are. And I've had the joy of being in NCS chapters in North Carolina and Naples, up in the San Francisco chapter. So if you're on the road and you just want to, experience it, it's pretty cool. It's a great network. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about leadership. And I think I just want to thank Chip and the group here. We should all just thank the leadership they have to make this happen. The talk I want to talk about today is leadership and why leadership. So, I think for all of us, as Christian men, how you show up and how you live your life is a reflection of your faith. And so I think I'm going to challenge you today to think about, how do you improve as leaders? How do you think about how you show up, and whether you're leading a company, whether you're leading a team, whether you're leading a family, everyone here has a role of leadership. And I think it's an opportunity for you to shine your light. But the other part of the talk I think that is interesting is through this journey of my leadership, which I'll tell you about, there's a lot that can be learned from Jesus' leadership. We're going to talk about that a bit in a way I think that as I studied it and looked into it, it really was quite interesting. So that'll be a little bit what we talk about. And I think the parable that, Chip heard me talk about it a lot, that always kind of inspires me, and maybe I'll just lay it out as a foundation, is, the parable of the 10 talents. And the story that the master had 3 servants and gave each of them an allotment. One got 1 talent, one got 2 talents, one got 5 talents. He went away and entrusted them with his resources, and came back and years later said, "What did you do with what I gave you?" And the one who got 5 talents turned into 10 talents. And he said, "Well done, good and faithful servant." The one who got 2 doubled it. It's 4 talents. "Well done, good and faithful servant." The one who got 1 buried the talent in sand, did nothing with it. And he didn't just get that's not so good. If you look at the parable, it's like, bad job, wicked servant, you should have at least put it in the bank. And not doing something with what he had, the parable wasn't that you didn't do a good job, it was you did a terrible job. And he took the 1 talent and gave it to the person who got the 10 talents. So it actually comes to Chip the 11 talents, not 11x, really, like 11x. So, but the parable brings out, we're all given gifts, skills, your resources, and we're called to do something with that. And are you doing enough with that? So that's my challenge today as we talk about leadership and think about hopefully some things that might be helpful in that journey. So, I'll tell you maybe as context to my story, and I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. But in business, I run the company ZRG Partners. We do executive recruiting, talent work. We work with leaders, placing leaders in organizations. We do some pretty fun work. We placed the president of the NCAA, where we took the governor of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, put him in charge of the NCAA. We worked with Jeff Bezos on his search for the Washington Post CEO. We brought in a new leader to try to change the makeup of the Post. Which happens, he resigned after that when he didn't endorse the president. But we did Top Golf CEO search. Dan over here, who's worked with us, is working on Subway CEO search, $17 billion business. And so I'm around leadership. Our business is all about helping companies find leaders. But the other part of it, and I'll share just briefly my journey, and I think my journey kind of is more of an entrepreneur's journey in building businesses, but I'll share some of that. So I'll give you a little bit of my history, and this is where it started. People say, how did you become an entrepreneur? And it started actually in first grade. I was on the top of the monkey bars. A kid who was new to the school came up and he wanted to get to the top, and I wasn't letting him get to the top. But he said to me, "Hey, I'll give you 5 cents if you get off the top." And I took his 5 cents. He went to the top, and I saw, capitalism's pretty good. You have something of value, you can get something with that. And the ironic part is that kid, the first grader, ended up being the best man at my wedding. He ended up going on to have a a really successful career, and did very, very well. But it was two kids on monkey bars finding out the value of exchange. And, that carried on through the years of, we battled in monopoly, and I figured out how, if you land on a property, buy it, mortgage it so no one else could own it, just borrow against the properties, close the board out, and I would kick his butt in monopoly, and it was good. But I learned some good principles, and it led to, I've been fortunate. I started my first company, right out of college, grew up in California, went to Cal State Fullerton. I started a company in the financial service space, and it was a startup with two other partners. We didn't know what we were doing, put $1,000 in a bank account, and I would say it's a really bad idea to tell anybody to do that, but it ended up 10 years later, we were an Inc. 500 growth company. We got it to 80 million in revenues, and we had a dream to want to take that company public. And in those days, there wasn't much of a private equity market, but you could take companies public. And so we did that. It was an exciting thing for a 34-year-old to go through a roadshow process. And I tell people, like, highlights of my career is pretty exciting. We hopped out of JFK on the Concorde jet. We flew to Europe to start this roadshow. It's like, what a great country America is. You can go to state school, not know anything, take a company public. And we got it public, seeing the ticker come across was exciting. And then the next 3 years, we got it to about 200 million. We leveraged that capital and then successfully sold that business to American Express, and spent a couple of years at American Express, saw what that was like. And then chapter 2, started my current business. And again, a startup, started with, 4 people and no capital 5 years ago. And through that cycle, we've grown. Today, it's a 650 person company. We're in our second round of private equity. We operate globally, US, Europe, we're in the Middle East, Australia, Brazil, and we do some really fun work. And that's been kind of my journey of leadership. So it's been not only placing and working with leaders, but growing companies through these phases of startups, privately held, capital-based, and larger. So that's kind of the foundation of leadership I wanted to share with you, as I give you some of my thoughts on leadership. So let's start with what is leadership? And I kind of define it as leadership's guiding and impacting outcomes, enabling groups of people to work together to accomplish something they wouldn't do individually. And leadership, in my mind, too, is influence. It's not authority, it's not title, it's your ability to influence someone. So, as you think about leadership, I'm going to share with you what I think are kind of 7 interesting pillars of leadership that we can think about. So the first one is about casting a vision. So I'm going to talk about these pillars in 3 spheres. One, a little bit of my story. We're going to look a little bit about what we can take from Jesus as a leader and kind of some of the industry things we could take. So vision, I would start with, an organization without a vision is no organization at all. You have to have a North Star of what you want to build. I've always had this in my businesses to have this big aspiration. I remember we were a $10, $20 million business. We had this aspiration to get to 100 million. That was the North Star. We got to the 100 million. Now we're about 280 million in top line revenue. And we've got a $1 billion aspiration for growth 7 years out. And what does that mean? The impact on families. And so having a vision of where you want to go is important. And I think as you think about your leadership, I just say people will buy the vision of what you want to be, not necessarily what you are today. So think about what you could create for them. If you look at the industries, Amazon's vision, it wasn't just a bookstore. It became anything you want online. Apple was not just devices, it's experiences, right? It's, Martin Luther King's vision. He had a dream, our founding fathers. So vision is important. But we look at Jesus and vision. There's a couple things we could look at. First off, the genius and beauty of Jesus' vision, and I think the arc of faith, right, is Old Testament, sin, the fall of man, 600 laws, 12, you got the commandments. Well, he came in and simplified things. He started with the vision of, it's 2 things that are important. What's the most important commandment? It's love God, love your neighbor. He simplified everything down to a simple vision. And with that vision, you got not only a better life today, but you got eternal life. And then the vision carried on, as he worked with his disciples. And he gave them quite a vision and laid out to them kind of a task. Well, what was that vision? It was, the Great Commitment, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Well, step back and think about that. You've got these 12 disciples sitting in the dirt around a campfire. There's no cell phones. There's no transportation. There's no internet. There's no Starlink. And it's like, go into all the world and preach the gospel. What do you think they're thinking? I mean, the way they got around was camels. I don't think they even had horses, from what you can see in the Bible. So talk about big vision. That was, I mean, I'm sure they were sitting like, you want us to do what? Go into all the world? How are we going to do that? But he laid out that vision. And, visions capture hearts. So, think about in your own leadership, what is your vision? Vision for your company, vision for your team, vision for your family. It's an important part. The second one, I think it's, one of the geniuses of Jesus we'll get to is how he communicated. And I would just say, in my story of, the little bit of success that I've had, a lot of it comes down to, I think, being able to communicate, speak, write. And I always, if I speak to young, high school kids or college kids about career, what they should do, I always come back to, you got to learn how to communicate. I see it all the time. You could be the most brilliant straight A student, but if you can't communicate, the person who communicates is going to be promoted over the person that just does great work. So master communication. What does that mean? It's speaking, it's writing, it's communicating, right? And if you think about it, people retain what they say, 10% of what they hear, 20% of what they read, but 80% of what they experience. You've got to touch people in different ways. And if you look at some of the business icons, right? Steve Jobs, his presentations were master classes in how you communicate. I love some of the Christian speakers. Andy Stanley is one of my favorites. If you listen to Andy Stanley, his simplicity of a message is just powerful. Another one I like just in communication, Mark Clark, who wrote The Problem with God, just a cool communicator. So think about that. But when you think about Jesus and communications, I think that's where you can really look and say, this is a masterclass. So first off, the storytelling was off the charts. He would tell stories in parables. He wouldn't just tell people, hey, here's the way it works. God loves you, and if you screw up, he'll welcome you back. He didn't say that. He gave the parable of the prodigal son, right? The parable of son went to his father, said, Dad, I don't want your stuff. Give me my money now. I want to leave. He goes off, squanders it on bad ideas, bad living, ends up in a pig pen eating the pig's food. And what am I going to do? My father's servants live better than I do. I should maybe go back on plead with my father to take me back. And in that story, you think about the drama of the story is, what would a father think about a son who just did that and coming back? Many here, most of you here are fathers. When your son does that, you'd probably be like, okay, son, that was, you really screwed this one up. Maybe you need to pay the price for a while. But in that story, the father ran to the son as he saw them approaching and embraced the son and celebrated the son. So, like the example, when I think about how Jesus could have just explained that, the love of the Father, and how he just wants to welcome us in, but he did it through storytelling. The Good Samaritan's another great story, in terms of what does it mean? What are the greatest commandments? Love God, love your neighbor. Who's your neighbor? And he tells the story of the Samaritan side of the road, and who was actually an arch enemy of the person that helped them, someone in this society who they wouldn't have related with. And so, Jesus not only talked in parables, he talked in metaphors, and he would talk about, I'm the bread of life, I'm the light of the world. He would talk in ways that made people think. So I think as you think about communications, I would just say this, it's been proven that storytelling ignites a part of your brain that processes differently. We've actually had at some of our company meetings, we've had neuroscientists speak on the power of storytelling, and it actually does something to someone's brain in processing and understanding. So go back 2,000 years, why did Jesus communicate that way and not just tell people things? Well, it gets people to think, right? And it gets people to understand concepts. So as you think of your leadership, again, I would just say embrace communications. The next pillar, third pillar is, and the next couple are about people, right? Investing in people. And I think I told you a bit about our story. We help companies find great leaders, and it's a cool part of what we do. In the industry, you can look at some of the great leaders, Jack Welch, who, if you look at his leadership team, he had an amazing group around him that ended up becoming, the CEO of 3M, of Home Depot, of Honeywell. These were his direct reports that ended up being great leaders. He developed and selected great leaders. But, I think the interesting one, and I think I'm going to, claim this, people talk about Jesus and what was Jesus's profession? before he was the carpenter. No, I'm going to argue he wasn't. I'm going to say Jesus was a recruiter. He wasn't a carpenter. It's the most blessed of professions to be. So Jesus was a recruiter. Think about what he did. Right? So comes out and he's got to build a team. And how did he build that team? Well, I'll put this in the analog of, if you have a startup business or if you have a nonprofit business, it's hard to hire people when you don't have a budget, you don't have a great recruiting team to help you, you've got to pay people under market. Like you think about the hiring, it's easy when you're American Express and you have a brand, you can pay people at market, but when you're a startup business or a nonprofit business or a faith-based business, you often don't get the benefit of stock options and buying people out of things, and so you have to be scrappy. Well, look at who Jesus recruited for that initial team. He went out and got tax collectors. He got some fishermen off of a boat. He assembled a team of a pretty ragtag group of guys that became that initial group. And, it wasn't a very compelling job offer. It's like, follow me. I have no benefits. You get no pay. And guess what? At the end of this, you're probably going to end up dead. Like I'm going to end up, crucified in a bad way. So he was selling a pretty tough job opportunity. So I'd say he was a pretty good recruiter in that sense. I think when you think about leadership, picking your team matters. And I just say, from Jesus, you can certainly see that, and we'll talk about not only did he pick the team, but he had to pour in and develop the team. And I think I just say in different stages of life of a business or leadership, you have to look at who you can really attract, what your budget is. I work with several of the nonprofit leaders here. We have that discussion, but it's hard because you've got to get the most out of people with a budget that's a little bit limited. So, Jesus was a recruiter. That's the first part. But then I think the next piece, you can bring people on, but you have to help them grow and expand. It's not enough just to bring a team on. And certainly if you're hiring a ragtag team of fishermen and tax collectors and a group that's probably doesn't have all the experience. So, I would say, my own story, as we grew, that same thing happened. In the early stage of a company, you don't get the best people. You get people with raw talent and ability, and you have to find people on a budget you can afford. And then through time, it gets easier. But you have to pour in and develop your people. LinkedIn did a workplace report, and they just said that companies that invest in their people are 94% more likely to retain their best talent. So, if you're leading a group or a company, what are you doing to invest in the development of your people? So think about that. It's something that people crave learning and development, and it needs to be part of what you do as a leader to pour into that. Well, what did Jesus do in the development sense? He, first of all, he was a very effective time manager. So he kind of figured out, and something we can learn from, right? He had a big impact in 3.5 years, but he poured a lot of time into these 12 disciples. And he also picked a subgroup of 3 that he spent even more time, right? So intimacy, time with them, and he was really smart with his time. His closest being, again, Peter, James, and John. The other thing he did in terms of investing in his people, he empowered them. And he didn't just talk to them, he empowered them. You look at some of the miracles, the feeding of the 5,000, you look at that story and they came up and we have no food, and what are we going to do? And he told them what to do, and he had them perform the task of doing something. He didn't just perform the miracle, he had them be involved in it. And that plays out through how he worked with what he did. The other part of what he did, when we talk about this, is there's a leadership concept I'm going to talk about that I like to call it etch. As leaders, all of us have an impact on people's lives that sticks with them. You etch an impact on them. And this is one of the things I like to talk about in how you develop people. And I think Jesus modeled this. Well, what is etch? Etch is a process that starts with E, of encouraging people. So think about the people you work with. You encourage them. Start with that. You can be all you can be, right? The second piece, you have to teach them. That's the T part, right? Teach them, develop them. Third piece, though, you do need to challenge people. You need to challenge them to do more. And the last piece is hold them accountable. And I think, Chip does a lot of leadership work and working with people. You find leaders that are probably good at one or two of these things. Maybe your style is, I'm a good encourager, or I just like to hammer people, hold them accountable. There's a balance in a leader in what people need at different points in time, right? And Jesus modeled that. You look at how he was with his disciples, right? In terms of encouraging, he taught them. He spent a lot of time teaching them, spending time answering questions. He challenged them, go in all the world, preach the gospel. He challenged them to do more. And he did hold them accountable, although he did it with grace. So think about that as just a way to think about how you're dealing with your people. The next one on people is cultivating loyalty. So you hire a team, you're pouring into your team. Well, how do you keep them from leaving? How do you keep people being loyal and to what you're doing? So, I've always had this formula as I built my teams is, you have to spend time not just in the office. You're spending time off-site. You're spending social time. You're finding time for retreats. You need to know your team's own goals. You need to know what they care about. You need to know what's important to them and how your goals are aligned with where they want to go in their life. If you look at some of the industry stories, the Harvard Business Review said 58% of employees would stay with their company longer if they felt more trusted and valued, that they want to feel recognized. Are you recognizing your team? Are you recognizing what they do? It's important. Some of the industry icons, and this one, I pull over to, creating loyalty. I love the stories of John Wooden, coach at UCLA. John Wooden, was an iconic coach and did some amazing things at UCLA, but his leadership principles and how he created just deep loyalty with his team goes off the chart. And I've been fortunate through the years have had Bill Walton speak at a couple of our conferences. We would talk about John Wooden and what he did and the devotion that the team had in John Wooden. So, I think as leaders, just because you have authority doesn't mean you have loyalty, and that there's a lot that goes into it. So what did Jesus do to create loyalty with his group? Well, first of all, it was deep personal relationships. He lived life with these disciples for 3.5 years. The other one, which we don't think about, but, he actually partied with his disciples. Look at the wedding. One of the first miracles, it was a wedding that they were all invited to, and there was wine flowing because the first miracle was they ran out of wine, and he created, the best wine. And I mean, the weddings in those days weren't a 2-hour event with a little bit of dancing. It was an event. So he was together. They were enjoying life together. He served them humbly, and we could talk for hours about servant leadership, but I think it was more, humbly, the humility he had. And if you look at that as a characteristic of creating loyalty, the word humble and humility appear in the Bible around 80 times. That's how much it's talked about. And 20 of those in the New Testament. So, we're called to be humble around Jesus' example. But, his ultimate loyalty, and again, you look at what Jesus did for all of us, is, suffering and giving up his life for his disciples. For us, he showed that cultivating loyalty is a key thing. The sixth pillar is around capital. And I would just say my own journey, I wouldn't have grown businesses without bringing capital. First company, we raised private capital to fund stuff. We did an IPO. My current business, we've gone to 2 rounds of private equity capital. We've done a private credit raise of over $120 million. Like, I have capital. With that capital, I've bought a bunch of businesses. We've grown. Businesses grow with capital. And so, I think you look at almost any business today, capital is the leader's lever to scale something. And, you can go through industry stories of, Elon Musk's story is actually pretty interesting if you ever dig into that. But, the early days of Tesla, it was a bankrupt company. And he personally invested $6.5 million to save it after it was on the brink of bankruptcy in 2008. And we all know what that ended up being worth and value today in the dollars for him. So capital has fueled growth from almost every organization. But how does capital relate to Jesus and to, so I'd say first off, human capital is a form of capital. And, Jesus and the kingdom was scaled from Jesus to 12 disciples to 48 to the 100 to now. You think about there's in the world today, The numbers say there's 3 billion Christians from that beginning start of what was a small group. The church and the nonprofits of today, they do require capital. And I think in looking at some of the numbers, it's said that I think the capital every year that's given to churches and nonprofits and Christians pay $135 billion. So all of this does take capital. Businesses take capital. Building of the faith takes capital. I think that's an important part. So, and Jesus teaches us and the Bible teaches us a lot about money. And again, money and possessions are mentioned 2,300 times in the Bible. It's mentioned more times than faith and prayer. So it's an important one. So, could take this back. For business, it's certainly helpful to grow a business with capital if you can get it, right? Nonprofits work with a lot of you. If you can't raise the capital, you can't carry on the mission of what you need to do. It's hard. You've got to do it. I think in the Christian faith, I think we're called to be part of that effort that requires capital, and our faith asks that of us. And then the last pillar, and I think this one's interesting, and I have it as embracing no to find your yes. And I think, just along my journey, I would just say I've heard hundreds and hundreds of no's. When we first tried to take my first company public, we had 3 months and about 150 no's from the market. Nobody was interested. We were too small. We were in the wrong sector. They thought, whatever the reasons were, they didn't want to. We finally, after I think 150 no's, found a single underwriter that said, this seems interesting. They brought a co-underwriter in. We were able to raise the money. Off we went. Same thing as I did my private equity raise, my first one when we were 10 million in revenues, a small business. You get tons of no's to get to the yes. And I think a lot of people in their own businesses and their own endeavors aren't willing to endure the number of no's it takes to get to a yes. And I think that plays through in a lot of ways. It plays through in, nonprofits raising money. Unfortunately, you've got to go through a bunch of no's to get to a yes. It's not a fun, but I view every no, you're a step closer to getting to your yes, right? So no is actually a positive if you're willing to work through that. I think there's two things I take from on Jesus. Well, first of all, Jesus would say no to things that didn't fit his time. He would take time for himself. He would find time to prioritize what he needed to do. He didn't spend his time accepting the things that he thought were the right use of his time. In 3.5 years, spent time with his disciples. Yes, he would go off path, and if someone needed healing, they touched him, he would help them. But he was a very good time manager. He knew how to say no. But also, how many people said no to Jesus, to what his message was? And you think about, he was performing miracles. He was raising people from the dead. And there were still people who were saying, no, I don't believe this. You think, how could that be? You're there in those days. And he's, healing the sick and the blind and raising people from the dead. Yet people said no over and over and over again. And so, he did, he modeled for us that it's okay to be a Christian and have people not accept what you're saying. But the challenge to me, and I think this is something that as I've thought about this book and the content, I hear enough no's on my thing, and then for all of us, how often have you pushed a conversation where you heard a no? I don't do it enough. It's easy when it's a convenient conversation, but how do you get out of your comfort zone and measure how many times are you having a conversation where it could lead to a no? I don't want to hear about this Jesus. I want to hear about your faith. So that's my personal challenge. Something for all of us to think about. How do you put yourself in a spot where you hear more no's? And again, I think no is a superpower. And so I think just in terms of kind of the summary, hopefully that's helpful. The pillars that, we talked about, cast a vision, right? Be a great communicator, whatever way you are. Your team matters. Pick a great team. Invest in your team. Cultivate loyalty in your team. Capital is how you're going to scale. And don't be afraid to embrace no of your time. Don't be afraid to embrace no in the asks that you have, because that's going to lead you closer to the yes that you're going to have. So hopefully that's helpful. I've written a book on this that digs deeper in each of the pillars. It's got a study guide. You can get it on Amazon or on iBooks. It's called The 7 Pillars. I've got a few copies today if somebody wants one. And happy to have follow-on notes. You can reach me on LinkedIn easily. There's my email address if you want to drop me a note. And just passionate about leadership and our faith and how that can all converge together for making us better men, better Christians, but also hopefully today you saw a side of Jesus that's a pretty attractive side of Jesus. I think this book to me is a way that non-Christians will have a chance to look at this guy called Jesus and say, wow, he did some pretty cool stuff. He told some pretty cool stuff. So I think for me, it's going to be an opportunity for I've got a broad network of non-Christians that follow on LinkedIn that may lean into learning more about the King that we call Jesus. So, but thank you guys for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Larry. A master class on leadership, no doubt. What do you say to the guy in the room who doesn't consider themselves a leader? Like, that's not a label they feel like they qualify for. Maybe they're early in their career, they're single, they don't have they just wouldn't. How's this connect to them? What do you think?
You're going to be leading something. I mean, you're going to be leading a family. You're going to be leading your own life. I mean, so everyone is a leader in a different way. So, I think that, if you're in the business side, you're eventually leading a team, you're growing, you're expanding, or in a family. I mean, I think it's as relevant as you think about a family that you're trying to manage, and certainly being a father isn't easy with kids. I've got 3 boys, not always easy. I think it's the principles relate to the same way, and again, called to be all you can be. I mean, I think for all of us, there's an element of leadership that we need to embrace.
Good, especially when we think of it as influence. Like, we're all having influence on somebody, whether it's title or something important. And we could even use this grid as we think about leaders who are rising, like leaders we want to attach ourselves to, and to think about, because you become like the people you work with, whether you like it or not. So that's going to be good. I'll ask you a personal question.
That's okay. We're not going to do that.
Yeah, we're going to do that. Some of the no's you've heard about faith that's coming from your own family.
Yeah. How
do you lead your family? What does that look like when they don't share your faith? I know this has been one of the burdens of your life. And being friend, I know this, but what's that look like? How have you navigated that?
Yeah, I'd say I love everything about Jesus, Christian faith. I don't always like free will. I wish I could have a trump the free will part when it comes to family members, but no, I think it's people are on their own journey of finding faith. I was fortunate to be born and raised in a very Christian family that was accepted the Lord if I was 6 years old. I don't know if part of my life to faith wasn't part. I had a great family with the church 9 times a week and grew up with that. And generally that's been a big part. Certainly have chapters to be closer or further from where I need to be. But, I think it's, I've been challenged. I think there's times when kids don't want to listen to fathers, and you have to, show it in how you live your life. I think I wrote a book, my first book, a book called Laws and Just, that looks at the proof of faith through the analogy of the O.J. Simpson murder trial. And if you say, if you could prove O.J. didn't do it through science evidence, DNA, all that, well, what if you look at the arguments of God and Jesus through the same lens? What's the odds that it's not true? And it's astronomically proven. So, I've tried to do what I can to leave breadcrumbs behind, even if they don't, share my faith by the time I'm moved on, they'll be there. So, not easy.
Not easy. Ongoing. It's kind of it's an ongoing tension, I would assume.
Sure.
Yeah. How does Jesus lead you?
Well, I'd say certainly seeking God's will in what I do, seeking God's will in decisions, trusting, when it comes to, situations, I always have this God, open the doors you want open, shut the doors you want shut. And I think for all of us, there's times that, I've had times where somebody buy a business and the door shuts and it's very sad, but it's like trusting God that that's okay. That wasn't the door you wanted. There's another door that's going to open up. So, praying for his will, trusting it, which again, you don't always understand it at the time or unless you really want
what you hear at the time of different things. You may not make a sale with a client. You may not raise the capital you want at the time you want, or your kid might not get in the right college. And those are stress points. But I think it's having the comfort to trust in the Lord. And I would just say my faith through the years has given me a strong sense of inner peace. Say, what is my faith done? I mean, it's just that I have peace in what's going to happen. Like, it's all going to end up okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know how the story ends. It ends up okay. I have inner peace with it. Certainly, I've lived a life in business and still do lots of stress. I mean, I've got investors and boards and things, and there's a lot happening. But there's an inner peace. It's all fine. It's going to work out okay. I give it my best, and it'll be what it's going to be. And so. That's how I can look at it.
There's anchor of peace. It sounds like you pray and seek God's will, and then you look at what happens on the ground as the answer to that prayer.
Yeah,
and run with it.
Yeah.
That's good. I think sometimes Christians we separate circumstances from God's will sometimes, and I guess there's ways that we can sort of you talk about vision. It's like you're selling the future, and within the future, but in the immediate, God leads us through what's available to us.
He does. I'll add to that because I think sometimes I'll talk to some Christian men who I'm waiting for my dream job. I'm waiting for God to open the door. It's like, okay, have you applied to 100 jobs? Have you networked? Have you done your part? Like, you got to bang down the door to do your part. If you're trying to raise money, well, how hard did you work to do that? You're not just sitting there and going, God, bring me a private equity investor who knocks on my door today. Like, that's not how it works. So I think we're called to work hard, to bang on the doors, and then trust the fact that if you did all what you can do in your power, then what's going to happen is going to happen. But I don't think as Christians we can be mediocre. I think there's sometimes it feels like it's okay for business guys in the Christian faith to just be average. I don't think we're called to be average. I think we're called to shine the light of God with the gifts we have.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with being wildly successful if that's what God's put in front of you. So be all you can be and put the effort. Don't, and certainly pray, but don't pray with doing nothing. That's what we're not called to do that.
No, we see that sometimes too, and there's some verses in Ecclesiastes 11 that talk about cast your bread upon the water all over because you don't know what's going to come back. Sow your seed in the morning and the evening.
Yeah.
You don't know which ones are going to take root. And there's this pious passivity, I think, sometimes that just pray and sometimes we get stuck just praying for years and nothing ever happens.
Well, on that one, just to add, I mean, I take comfort in the parable of the sower who lays seeds, and some of those seeds don't take ground, some do, but some get 100 times return on the parable. And I think I have opportunities to plant seeds. I mean, I'm not a pastor. I'm not out, leading 10 people to the Lord every week. And you kind of admire pastors who do the calls. Like, well, they're going to have a really good spot in heaven. It's going to be a mansion for them. I don't know where they're going to put me. I'll probably be in a trailer park, maybe, if God's going to put me. Have I not had the same impact? But planting seeds is impactful, and the ability to do what you can do in your sphere of influence to talk about, find opportunities, I think is important. So for business guys, I think we're not all called to ministry, but it can be ministry to find opportunities to share.
That's good. It's really good. Talk about the difference between ego or leadership that's driven by ego versus leadership that's driven by a sense of stewardship. And I just want to double click on one thing you said. When you were talking about vision for the future, pillar 1, you talked about the idea that the company grows, it's going to have this impact on families. And you said that exact phrase. So talk about that. And did you have a journey of moving from egocentric leadership to more service-centric leadership?
Yeah. I would say I'm a capitalist, and I've always wanted to create good companies that have value, that that do that. So to me, it's not the ego piece. I feel like I didn't go to Ivy League school. I didn't grow up working for the top companies. I figured it out, bootstrapped it, and I've always seen that people I work with, it doesn't matter where they went to school, what they did, stuff they do. So and I think I've by default with that practice servant leadership. I'm trying to empower people that are going to help me reach my own goals, right? So, I think people would say, and then I don't think it's not a hierarchical place. I don't lead through ego. I lead through influence, try to get things done, which creates that. Now, the other side of it, leaders need some element of swagger, likability. People follow people, right? So, there's humility, but there's also, are you a leader someone wants to follow? Right. And so there's different styles that you do that, but you have to be a leader that creates loyalty, that is enjoyable. I mean, that is an element of it. So, I'd say there's, different ways you may characterize it. It isn't necessarily ego driven, but it could be, you're just fun, you're enjoyable, you're caring, you're
comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah. What are you?
Healthy level of confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If your team doesn't like you, and I say this to people work for people, not companies. And, when we recruit people out of organizations, one of the things we ask is, who do you report to? What's that relationship like? If they have a deep relationship with the person they report to, oh yeah, I've been in the wedding and I've worked with this person for 10 years and our families are close. Good luck extracting that person out. If they work for a company and have no relationship with their boss, easy to get them to move. So relationships matter, with the people you work with. And, sometimes I think leaders forget that. People don't work for companies. They work for people. And so you have to say, what is your style to create that culture of loyalty, of care?
Good word. I've got one more question, and then I'll turn it open to you guys. And you'll have to speak loudly this morning. You began with the parable of the sword, the 10x, the 5x, and 1x, which is an x really.
1 minus.
Yeah, 1 minus. And you said, the question is, are we doing enough with what God has given us? How do you know whether you're doing enough with what God has given you?
I don't think we do know, but I mean, I'm certainly that, and you hear me talk about that parable a lot. I think it's probably what rings in the back of my head is someday we sit in front of the Lord and it's like, what did you do with what I gave you? And those are skills, those are resources, those are, and again, people are called for different things. So it certainly drives me to say, with what I have, I'm supposed to do the most I'm able to do in this chapter of life. But there's also, for me, another chapter ahead. There'll be a day when, I'm retired from the commercial side and I feel, a calling to help Christian nonprofit leaders. When we do that now, you and I, with some nonprofit leaders with our, extra time we have. So I think there's chapters of life, I always think people in different chapters where your kids are, where your business is, where, and I think you find ways where faith should be integrated within that. But you may be called to be a business guy or a teacher or a doctor for a period of time, but there could be another chapter of your life. Jesus did a lot in 3.5 years.
Yeah.
So I take comfort in that there's next chapters ahead for me at some point that I'll have a bigger impact on the kingdom. But in the meantime, I don't diminish the fact he put me in this spot for a reason. Thank him. I'm blessed. I'm very fortunate. But being a steward of that is certainly a responsibility.
And that's really good because I think that have I done enough question can come from other sources, right?
Yeah.
Have I done enough because all my peers are ahead of me? Or have I done enough because my father usually is not impressed with what I did? And that's not what you're talking about.
No.
You're talking about the sense that God's given me these things. I already have them.
Yeah.
And am I putting them into play the best I can at this point?
Yeah, and I think that's terrible. I mean, there's one got 1, one got 2, one got 5. Why does God give people different levels of talent? So everyone's not gifted in the same way. It's okay. And, but whatever you have, you're called to do the most with it, right? So you don't need to compare yourself to Elon Musk. Right? But you need to look objectively at who you are, what God's given you, and are you doing enough with that? And I think that's the challenge that I always think about and challenge others that, you have skills. What are you doing with that? Don't just be okay. Be great. Right? I mean, everyone should aspire to continue to learn, improve, and grow. I mean, that's and that's the work you do, and the coaching work you do with individuals and companies. And people need to be continually growing and advancing.
Great. All right. Some questions. All right, JD, let's start.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It was a wonderful talk. I want to ask you about you're clearly a very tenacious man, right? You're a big believer in, I'm going to keep calling on those private equity firms until somebody says, yeah, we're investing in this, right? Have you ever had an experience where, being a AAA personality that you are, have you ever had the experience of the Holy Spirit saying to you, wait on me, wait?
Well, I mean, there's been weight on circumstances that happen that I'd like to have happen. I mean, certainly there's times that, you know, you want to do something and the answer is no for a year or two or three till it happens. And so, you know, and I think it's a good question. I mean, one of my challenges is, and every year I kind of have a theme, I'm trying to listen better to God, you know, and figuring out how to do that and hear him and not hear me. Because I think it's hard to separate what you want from what God's saying to you, and finding that space to listen and hear. And then part of it comes from the word, part of it comes from, time to listen. But I'd say I'm a working process on that, you know, in terms of trying to separate, you know, what I think I want, what God wants. That's hard.
Good. Michael, just like everyone.
How did you balance work and marriage?
Yeah, so Chip had some erroneous facts on me. I'm married 39 years, not 31 years. I don't live in Edgewater. I live in Palm Beach. I'm in Bio, but thank you. Yeah, but
Take full responsibility.
yeah, so, and you know what I say this every year. We need a big company meeting. We just did the Bahamas with 230 people come in for a few days, and I always close it with what's important. The company knows. I talk about what's important to me is faith, family, work, and life. And so faith's number one. My family is important. I mean, so there was a chapter after I sold my first business and started ZRG for 10 years. It was a lifestyle business. I was there for all three of my kids' traveling basketball, baseball games. It was an amazing chapter. I did not kill myself during that 10-year period. I was around. And I didn't pay for anything. It was wonderful. When my last son went off to college is when I raised private equity in ZRG. I was ready to go. So I think there's chapters of life like where you say, hey, you know, kids are around. Don't not be there for your kids. I love my kid. It was fun. It was a great stage of life. And through that, you know, been married a long time. I have a great wife, a great marriage. And, you know, it is challenging with the time it takes to build a business and have that. But, you know, I think it's just always reminding yourself of, are you balancing those things? And when it gets out of balance, bring it back into, you know, don't let work overtake you, which it can do, right? For sure. When you want to achieve something, you can work too much, but, you know, I navigated it okay. I think my wife would say probably I give you a beating. So.
Good. Robert.
It's great that you liked. What do you do when you have a team that's not necessarily willing to confront the reality of where they are and kind of living in fantasy land?
Well, you know, encourage, teach, challenge, you know, hold accountable. So I think there's that process that to be heard, there's a reality that has to be, you know, pointed out to them to understand it. So, you know, these are hard things when people think they're doing the right thing and you think you need to tell them, no, you're not doing the right thing. So there's bringing them along in a journey of what needs to be done, what are the gaps, involving them in solving that problem, and then holding them accountable to solve the problem. So I think when it's just not happening, telling them, not happening, just do this, doesn't change things. But if you go back to like, what are you supposed to accomplish? What are we doing together? What are our gaps? Let's get together and talk about that. I think it's aligning people around understanding the problem, including them in the solution, getting their buy-in, and then holding them accountable. I think it's the process that might open the minds up to change. But at some point, they may be the wrong people. You know, and there is, you know, certainly people for different stages of companies, right, that you may have to think about.
Miles?
Thank you, Chip, and the service team for making this happen. Thank you, speaker, for the talk. My question, you spoke about we're being called to be better, to be great. Can you share with us a story where you had to overcome a vice that stopped you from becoming the next level that you could be?
Yeah, well, there was, you know, plenty of times when people would scoff at the thoughts of taking my first company public. You guys aren't, you know, why would you do that? That you don't, you know, you're not going to be able to do it. I mean, there's been dissenters who, you know, wouldn't believe in the things I was doing. And, you know, I just listen to them and ignore them, basically. It's like, you know, you have this goal of what you want to do. But, you know, I think there's people that may doubt you along the way. I get it now. I mean, I've laid out to our company $1 billion aspiration 7 years from now. We're 280 million today. It's a big number. People roll their eyes. It's like, yeah, but what's the downside? We hit 600 million. It's okay. Like, I'm not worried about it. Like, we set a big goal. We did past goals. So like, sometimes it's like, you're a leader, you're establishing what you want to do, get people to come along the journey with you. And people aren't all going to come along. But that's what leaders are doing. They're driving people into something bigger than themselves that they wouldn't be able to maybe envision possible. So it's the joy of leadership. And I love the all aspects of leadership. But yeah, a lot of leadership is just casting vision, getting people to believe, to do more. And so that's how I thought about it. Justin?
Larry, thanks for coming. Honor your Christ-centered vision for leadership. It's beautiful. If we had to zoom out and think about what's the point of leading a business in the first place, what do you think Jesus's plan or vision for capitalism or for good business is? If Jesus was in the room right now, how would he define a great business?
That's a good question. I think yes. A light shines on a person or a company doing great work, right? In whatever that sector is, whether you're a software company, whether you're, whatever you do. So I think doing good work with integrity that is admired, and someone says that's a good company with good leadership, and I think one of the challenges, and I think it's a tricky thing for Christians, if you claim to be a Christian and you're a leader, you're put on a microscope of everything you do, and oh my goodness. And I've seen more damage from leaders who claim to be Christians who then treat people poorly, they fire people without them knowing they're going to be fired, who do things so I'm haunted by the things you shouldn't do that turn people away and say, that's why I don't want to lean into this Christian faith. So I think there's a calling to, and that's why I think these concepts of leadership to me is it's hard. These are, not easy what I'm talking about, but to be a leader that shines through underneath the principles of Jesus. I was thrilled as I studied and kind of wrote this book to see hey, some of the stuff I've done actually does kind of align with Jesus. It was kind of I didn't start with the Jesus principles 40 years ago, but some of it does is seep through my DNA of leadership. And so I think we're called to shine the light. We're called to be stewards, right? So I think there are people that God is going to bless with resources because the church needs $135 billion a year. It doesn't come from mediocre six. It comes through people doing and being successful in tithing. So I'd love to ask him one day. I think, but again, I think it's okay, I think, to be called into the work you do. And if that's something that, God puts on your heart, that's what your skills are. But there's more we can all do. And that's, I think, where the influence to talk about our faith, to shine the faith through, is where the real opportunity for Christian business guys have to. Right. Tim?
Yeah, Larry, thanks for your talk. But the thing is, it is true, I think, that we all work for persons or leaders, but we do get paid through organizations. And so oftentimes I think that, how do you transfer those leaders' skill into the organization itself so that actually people are loyal to the organization, not so much to the leaders.
Yeah, that's part of my challenge right now. When I was a smaller business at 50 people, they were all loyal to me. I have 650 people now, and I have leaders, and those leaders have to embody the spirit of leadership I want to see so that people feel the same thing when I'm not the one impacting. So, my job is to create a culture that fosters the same beliefs, right, in terms of how we treat people, values, all those kind of things. And it gets harder with growth. It gets harder when you're a couple levels removed, right, in terms of a leader leading a leader that, that is of any faith or no faith, right? So I think about that just in trying to set the tone to how we do business, how we treat people, how we think about things. One of the things that was a great comment at the NTS retreat, we had the Intel CEO talking about his Christian faith, and one of the things he said that stuck with me is if you fire someone and they don't know it's coming, you failed as a Christian. People need to know they're not performing. You give them a chance to correct it. By the time you get to letting somebody go, they should know that they weren't performing. That is carefully and kindly performance managing somebody. So things like that, like how you treat someone in tough circumstances, easy in good circumstances, but what about when you have to fire somebody? They're not going to be happy. And they're gonna hold, they're not gonna like their leaders, but if you've done the right things to guide them through the performance planning, what's needed, and weren't able to do it, and then you move on, I think then we're doing what the best we can to do it in a way that would honor, the faith.
Last question.
Okay, so the guy who was asking about what Jesus would say, you would want to take a look at Romans 12, verse 8. If it's to give, then give generously. My question to you, Larry, is I think nowadays we're living in a business climate where it's very countercultural to what you're sharing. Efficiency and basically treating people like they're an expendable or even a burden. So how are we challenging that narrative? How can we do that as Christians? Because we're going away from what the Bible wants.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that narrative, but there's also people matter in business, right? I mean, AI is going to replace some tasks. People will have to find new ways, at certain levels to do jobs. But, I think people are always going to matter in terms of any business success. So, I think it's still, the concepts of, leading an organization, leading people, it's not going away. I mean, it may shift, and it shifted when, the wheel came out, shifted when transportation changed. We've had these systemic shifts of, how work was performed through, the years of innovation. But, it may be right now a push to efficiency. And there's some jobs that are going to go away, but there's other jobs that aren't going to go away. So it's skating to where the puck's going to be and guiding people to find roles that create value in the new economy. But 10 years from now, the business environment will look different. There'll be jobs that don't exist anymore. So, I think people need to evolve into where they can provide values.
Good. Well, we're going to have to leave it at that. Thank you, Larry. Woody, would you pray us out?
Thanks, Larry. Lord, thanks for today. Thank you for the challenge to be a leader. And what I'm hearing is, in a sense, how am I leading myself? Because I've been given talents and skills, and I may not be leading companies, I may not be leading other people, but I can lead myself. But follow your path in this world. Thank you for the challenge that's been set before us today. Help us as we go into our workplace today to be those leaders that shine forth your gospel and your truth. And Lord, the challenge of maybe no in business, people saying no to our financial, but how about that faith no? And that was a great challenge for me today. I pray that I would hear that and obey that command and call that put before me today. Thank you for NCS, and thank you for the ability to be here today. Help us to be the friends, fathers, and husbands that you've called us to be. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.